Ever felt trapped in a routine so predictable that it made you question everything around you? What happens when loneliness creeps in and unexpected connections start to feel dangerous? This is a story about boundaries, temptation, and the moment when one decision changes everything. That afternoon, the house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every subtle sound, from the faint hum of the refrigerator to the distant chirping of birds outside. I sat alone in the living room, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine I had no intention of reading. My husband, perpetually buried in work, was away on yet another business trip. By now, his absence was routine, and I had grown accustomed to it, or so I thought. Yet today, the emptiness felt heavier, settling over me like an unwelcome guest. I glanced at my phone, hoping for a message, a missed call, anything. The blank screen stared back at me, an unspoken reminder of how predictable my life had become. Love, or what I still called love, had faded into a comfortable rhythm, and that comfort had slowly hardened into monotony. The sudden slam of a car door broke through my thoughts. I peered through the window to see Ethan, my nephew, striding toward the house. Ethan was my husband's younger brother's son, though the small age gap between us made him feel more like a distant cousin. In his early 20s, Ethan carried himself with an effortless confidence, his charisma radiating in a way that demanded attention. I opened the door just as he reached it, masking my surprise with a polite smile. "Hey, Ethan, what brings you here?" I asked. He flashed a dazzling grin, his energy practically lighting up the doorway. "Uncle asked me to grab some property documents he left behind. Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. Come in," I replied, stepping aside. As he entered, I couldn't help but notice the way he moved, smooth and self-assured, as if the world bent slightly to accommodate him. He tossed his bag onto the couch and took in the room with an approving nod. "Still as stylish as ever. You've got great taste." I laughed, brushing off the compliment. "Flattery won't save you if you're here to cause trouble. What documents do you need?" "Not sure. Something about property papers," he said with a shrug before heading toward the study. As he disappeared down the hall, I found myself thinking about how strikingly different he was from my husband. Ethan's spontaneity, his easy charm, his unapologetic confidence, traits that had long been absent in my life, stood out like bold splashes of color on a gray canvas. I shook off the thought, feeling a flicker of guilt. He was family, after all. When Ethan returned, a folder in hand, I noticed a tattoo snaking along his forearm. It was subtle yet intriguing, something I hadn't seen before. He caught me staring and tilted his head with a teasing smirk. "You like it?" "It's interesting," I replied, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. We ended up chatting more than we ever had before. Ethan's stories were vibrant, brimming with humor and adventure, an exciting contrast to the dull routine I'd grown so used to. His laughter filled the room, light and infectious, dissolving the weight of the day. For a while, I forgot about everything. My husband, my responsibilities, the silent rules that governed my life. In that moment, it was just Ethan and me, two people sharing a connection I couldn't quite put into words. He leaned back on the couch, his eyes locking with mine. The pause in our conversation hung heavy, his gaze holding mine a heartbeat too long. As Ethan spoke, there was something captivating about the way he listened, completely, genuinely, as if my words held a significance I'd almost forgotten they could have. It was disarming, almost intoxicating. At one point, he reached for the glass of water on the coffee table, and our hands brushed. The contact was fleeting, yet it left an undeniable imprint on my mind, like an ember that refused to cool. I quickly pulled back, letting out a nervous laugh to cover the flush creeping up my cheeks. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, his tone casual, but his eyes searched mine with an intensity that felt anything but. "Of course," I replied too quickly, standing to create some space between us. "It's just, warm in here. That's all." I moved to the kitchen, my hands busying themselves with tasks that lacked purpose. I could still feel his presence behind me, the air between us taut, charged with an unspoken tension we both avoided naming. When I finally turned, Ethan was leaning against the doorway, his confidence radiating as effortlessly as his charm. "You seem different today," he said softly, his voice carrying an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. "Different how?" I tried to sound indifferent, though my heart quickened. "I don't know," he mused, his gaze steady. "Maybe more alive?" His words hit me like a gust of wind, leaving me momentarily unmoored. He wasn't just flattering me. There was a sincerity in his tone that made it impossible to dismiss. For the first time in ages, I felt truly seen. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. "Ethan, you should probably go soon," I said, my voice faltering as I turned away. "Why?" he asked, stepping closer. "Am I making you uncomfortable?" "No, it's not that," I replied quickly, though the catch in my breath betrayed me. "Then what is it?" His eyes held mine, steady and unyielding, and I had no response, at least none I dared to voice. The space between us seemed to shrink with every second. His presence was overwhelming, his confidence both intoxicating and disarming. I tried to summon my resolve, to remember the boundaries that existed between us. But as he stood there so close I could feel the heat radiating from him, my defenses crumbled. "This isn't right," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I know," he murmured, his voice low and deliberate. "But doesn't it feel right?" My heart raced as I looked up at him, caught in a moment that felt both impossible and inevitable. His hand reached for mine again, this time lingering, and I didn't pull away. The room seemed to close in around us, the rest of the world dissolving into a haze. It was just him and me, bound by an invisible thread I couldn't bring myself to sever. My mind screamed at me to stop, to take a step back, to think of the consequences. But I was frozen, trapped in the gravity of the moment, unable, or unwilling, to escape. Just as the tension reached its peak, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening shattered the silence. My heart leapt into my throat, the fragile bubble around us bursting in an instant. Ethan and I sprang apart, both of us snapping our attention toward the source of the noise. Standing in the doorway was my other nephew, Jake. His expression caught somewhere between confusion and suspicion. "Hey, Jake," Ethan said, his voice calm but a little too casual. Jake's eyes darted between us, sharp and probing. "Am I interrupting something?" "No, of course not," I replied hastily, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Ethan was just about to leave." "Yeah," Ethan chimed in, flashing a grin that seemed far too relaxed for the situation. "I was just picking up some papers for Aunt." Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. His skepticism was palpable. "Funny," he said slowly. "Uncle asked me to stop by and grab the same papers." A jolt of unease shot through me as Jake's words sank in. Ethan's flimsy excuse had unraveled in an instant, leaving us exposed. My stomach churned, and the shame I had tried to suppress surged to the surface, hot and suffocating. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said quickly, my voice trembling as I tried to maintain control of the situation. "Ethan already has the documents. You don't need to be here." Jake didn't move. His eyes narrowed, studying me with a quiet intensity that made my skin prickle. "Funny," he repeated, his tone edged with suspicion. "Uncle didn't mention you'd be here." Ethan shrugged, his demeanor unfazed, as if he couldn't feel the weight of Jake's scrutiny. "I didn't think it mattered," he said, his voice smooth and unbothered. "Aunt and I were just catching up, nothing more." The words hung in the air, their surface harmless but laden with an unspoken weight that neither of us dared acknowledge. Jake seemed to sense it, his gaze lingering on me a moment longer than was comfortable. "Well," he said finally, his tone clipped, "I'll let you two continue. Whatever this is." He turned and walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar behind him. The faint sound of his footsteps fading down the driveway felt like the closing of a trap door, sealing me inside a whirlwind of guilt and dread. The silence that followed was oppressive. Ethan looked at me. his expression unreadable, as though he was waiting for me to speak, to explain, or perhaps to justify the moment that had nearly unfolded. I couldn't meet his gaze. 1. The importance of communication in relationships. Effective communication is the foundation of any strong relationship. In the story, the narrator's dissatisfaction stems from a lack of emotional connection with her husband, compounded by his frequent absences and the monotony of their routine. These unspoken frustrations create a void, leaving her vulnerable to external validation. When couples avoid discussing their needs, fears, or desires, misunderstandings fester and emotional gaps widen. Instead of addressing her feelings, the narrator internalizes them, convincing herself that her complacency is normal. This highlights the danger of assuming that long-term relationships can survive on routine alone without nurturing passion and emotional intimacy. Open communication could have allowed the narrator and her husband to explore solutions, such as scheduling more quality time together, reigniting shared interests, or even seeking professional help through counseling. Addressing unmet emotional needs within the marriage might have prevented the narrator from seeking connection elsewhere. This lesson underscores the idea that silence in a relationship can be as damaging as overt conflict. Expressing vulnerability, even when it feels uncomfortable, can pave the way for greater understanding and renewed closeness. Couples who prioritize communication build a foundation of trust, making it easier to weather challenges and maintain emotional intimacy over time. The story serves as a cautionary tale about what can happen when communication falters. It reminds readers to actively engage with their partners, ensuring that both individuals feel valued, understood, and supported. In doing so, they can prevent the slow erosion of intimacy that creates fertile ground for temptation and dissatisfaction. 2. The danger of emotional vulnerability. Emotional vulnerability can be both a strength and a risk, depending on how it is managed. In the story, the narrator's loneliness and unfulfilled emotional needs make her susceptible to Ethan's attention. Her vulnerability stems from feeling undervalued and stagnant in her marriage, and Ethan's charisma and interest act as a temporary balm to her neglected emotions. When individuals are emotionally vulnerable, they often seek comfort in connections that validate their feelings. This can create a false sense of intimacy with someone outside their relationship, as seen with the narrator and Ethan. The narrator's vulnerability blinds her to the potential consequences of her actions, leaving her in a precarious emotional position. Understanding emotional vulnerability is crucial to preventing situations where poor choices are made. Self-awareness is the first step. Recognizing when feelings of loneliness or neglect arise and addressing them constructively can reduce the likelihood of seeking validation from inappropriate sources. For the narrator, this could mean reflecting on her emotions and discussing them with her husband instead of allowing them to fester. Another important aspect is setting boundaries. Vulnerable moments can lead to overstepping limits, especially when someone appears to offer what's missing in one's life. Knowing when and how to step back is key to protecting oneself and one's relationships. The story highlights how unchecked vulnerability can lead to a dangerous emotional spiral. While it's human to crave connection, it's essential to direct that need toward repairing or strengthening existing bonds rather than seeking solace outside of them. The narrator's brief interaction with Ethan is a stark reminder that emotional vulnerability, when not managed, can lead to regretful decisions that disrupt personal and relational harmony. This lesson encourages mindfulness and emotional resilience as safeguards against temptation. Disclaimer: we would like to clarify that this video is created strictly in accordance with YouTube's content guidelines and policies. The narrative presented is purely fictional and intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. Our goal is to provide insightful, thought-provoking content that encourages healthy discussions about relationships, boundaries, and emotional vulnerability. This story is not intended to glorify or promote any inappropriate behavior, but rather to explore the complex emotions and consequences that arise when personal boundaries are crossed. We do not condone any actions that could harm individuals or relationships in real life, and we strongly encourage responsible, respectful behavior in all personal and social interactions. If you or someone you know is experiencing difficulties in a relationship or struggling with emotional challenges, we encourage seeking professional help. There are resources available to support individuals facing difficult emotional or relational situations, and talking to a counselor or therapist can provide valuable guidance and support. We respect YouTube's community guidelines and strive to create content that aligns with these policies. Thank you for watching, and we hope this video has sparked thoughtful reflection and valuable insights. If you love this story, must subscribe to our channel so in future we will come up with the new stories. So if you are interested, you guys can support us by like and subscribe to our channel. Also tell what you like about this story.